I walked past the park like I always did. Same time, same path, same reason. But the bench was gone. Not broken, not moved. Gone. In its place stood a wooden stake jammed into the ground, with a laminated HOA violation flapping in the breeze, like it was proud of itself. Unauthorized structure removed per Regulation 14B. Just like that. No warning, no note, no human decency. They didn't even leave the bolts in the dirt. I stood there for 5 full minutes. I don't remember, breathing. My hands clenched and unclenched without realizing, because that bench wasn't just wood, it wasn't a decoration. It was my father's. I built it with him in mind. Every inch of it shaped by memory, every slat sanded like I was trying to carve him back into the world. And they erased it. Quietly, like he never existed. That's the moment it changed. That's the exact second I knew. This wasn't about rules, it was about power. And Karen, our smug vote-rigging HOA president, had just declared war. Only she didn't know it yet. Before I tell you what I did next, can you tell me where you're watching from? It helps to know I'm not the only one who's lost something important and refused to let it be buried by silence. And if you've ever dealt with someone like Karen, someone who thought a title gave them permission to rewrite your life, hit that subscribe button. Because the next part of this story, it's exactly for you. My name is Michael Reed. I'm 38. I grew up in this house. My father bought it after leaving the army. We didn't have much, but he believed in the things that mattered: respect, effort, follow-through. I spent a decade as an EMT before settling into a quieter life after he passed. I don't yell. I don't threaten. I don't start fights. But when someone tried to erase the only thing I had left of him, something built not for attention, not for credit, but for peace, they invited the wrong kind of silence. Because I may not speak loudly, but I document everything, I investigate, and when the time is right, I speak where it matters most, in court, in meetings, in front of neighbors who suddenly start to remember what decency looks like. Karen wanted control. What she got today was exposure. The next morning I woke up before sunrise, not to work, not to run errands, but to drive straight to the park and stare at that empty patch of dirt where the bench used to be. I didn't bring coffee. I didn't bring my phone. I just stood there, watching the wind push the laminated paper back and forth like it was mocking me. HOA violation. Regulation 14B. That line kept replaying in my head like a broken record. I didn't even have to pull out the bylaws. I knew them better than most homeowners on the block. 14B had nothing to do with benches. It mentioned seasonal obstructions, oversized holiday structures, and temporary pop-up tents. Nothing about permanent benches, especially ones placed near trees, far from walkways, in an open-use green zone that we all pay into. But I still went home, opened my filing cabinet, and pulled every single HOA packet I had ever received since Karen took office. Newsletters, notices, annual budgets, all color-coded and smugly formatted with community-first messaging. I scanned everything. No mention of new changes to 14B, no public vote, no proposal, just gone. My father's memory, ripped out and dumped like trash without so much as a courtesy call. And it didn't take a genius to figure out who gave the order. Karen always signed her digital newsletters with Madam President, like she was running a small country. She was the reason our front porch colors had to match the natural earth tone guide. She was the reason Lisa from 2 doors down got fined $100 for hanging string lights past October. Karen didn't ask. She ruled, and I had had enough. That afternoon, I knocked on Lisa's door. She answered cautiously until she saw my face. "They took the bench," I said. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You're kidding." "Yesterday," I nodded. No notice, no warning, just a laminated sign and nothing else. She stepped outside and folded her arms. "Karen?" I didn't need to say anything. She knew. We all knew. Lisa wasn't the only one. I visited 8 more houses that day. 3 neighbors had noticed the removal. One, a retired postman named Al, had seen a black truck with 2 men in safety vests loading the bench into the back. No city markings, no explanation. Karen was out there too, he added, watching from her car. I asked if he'd put that in writing. He shrugged. She already threatened to cite me for that bird feeder last month. I didn't push. But I wrote it down in my notebook. Dates, times, witnesses. I treated it like an incident report, just like I used to do on EMS runs. Details mattered, even the little ones. The following Monday, I called City Code Enforcement. I asked if they had any record of the bench removal. They didn't. I asked if they ever issued orders based on HOA complaints. Only if there's a safety issue, the guy said. Benches? That's homeowner stuff. We don't touch that unless it's blocking something. So it wasn't city ordered. It wasn't voted on. It wasn't permitted. That left one person with motive, means, and no accountability. Karen. I submitted a written request to the HOA for any records pertaining to the decision to remove the bench. I asked for board meeting minutes, public comments, the name of the contractor who removed it, and any budget approvals related to the removal. I received a one-sentence reply from the HOA's Gmail account, signed Karen, HOA President. It read, "No public meeting was necessary. Structure was in violation of Regulation 14B. Action taken under discretionary authority." That word again. Discretionary. The same word she used when she sent a warning letter to a single mom who painted her shutters blue instead of brown. I wasn't going to argue over email. I was going to build a case. I pulled the HOA's budget report from the last quarterly newsletter. One line item stood out. Grounds maintenance, 372/12, Oakview Park. I printed it, highlighted it, compared it to the past 3 quarters. Oakview Park had seen a grounds charge every spring but only once in the winter. I made note of the pattern. That night, I drove to the park again, this time with a flashlight. I scanned the edges where the grass had been disturbed. In the corner of the dirt patch, half buried, I found one of the old anchor bolts, rusted, stripped, left behind. I took it with me. Next, I started calling around to landscaping companies in the area, posing as a homeowner wanting to remove a small park bench. 2 of them recognized the description. One of them admitted they had done a job in Oakview a few days ago, pickup only. Cash. I asked for an invoice. He said the client requested no paper trail. That was enough. I had dates, a suspected vendor, photos, notes, witnesses. All I needed now was a stage. The next HOA meeting was 4 days away. I organized everything into a single binder, labeled tabs, color-coded highlights, printed stills from the neighborhood cameras that showed the truck entering and leaving the cul-de-sac. I printed copies of the HOA regulations, highlighted the real wording of 14B, and clipped it all together with a calm, calculated fury. When the night of the meeting arrived, I dressed like I was attending court. Slacks, collared shirt, no tie. I wasn't going to rant, I wasn't going to argue, I was going to present. I was the second homeowner to speak during open comment. I stood, introduced myself, and calmly handed copies of the binder contents to each board member. Karen tried to interrupt as I began, but the board secretary told her to let me speak. So I did. I read the regulation. I cited the lack of vote. I presented the security footage stills, the statement from code enforcement, and the cash invoice. Details. I told them about the anchor bolt, and then I looked Karen in the eyes and asked one simple question. Why did you think you could get away with this? She had no answer. Not that night. Not yet. Karen didn't respond that night. She just stared at me, blinking like the idea of being challenged in public hadn't quite registered yet. The board said they'd review the documents and consider an internal inquiry, but I could already feel it. The atmosphere had shifted. The neighbors in the room, the ones who usually kept their heads down and their mouths shut, were now looking around, whispering. Someone behind me murmured, "About time." That was the start, but not the end. Because while Karen stayed silent, in that room she came alive the next morning. The email hit my inbox at 8:03 a.m., subject line, Public disruption at HOA meeting. I opened it, read it twice. She accused me of creating an atmosphere of hostility, claimed my evidence was incomplete and out of context, and warned that any further harassment would result in legal action for defamation. She even CC'd the entire HOA board. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The truth was already working its way through the cracks she'd spent years covering up. Instead, I walked down to the City Hall building and hand-delivered a request for an HOA audit. Not optional, not negotiable. The city had guidelines for HOAs, and if they received 3 or more community complaints about financial mismanagement or abuse of discretionary power, they were required to initiate a review. I didn't just file mine, I brought 4 others. With me, neighbors I'd personally spoken with over the past week, all of whom had their own Karen horror stories. The retired couple she threatened over their mailbox color. The single mother fined for having a trampoline. The war veteran who had to pay a $250 landscaping violation for putting out a bench of his own 2 years ago. Each one signed their statement. Each one handed it in. I watched the city clerk file them all in a thick manila folder, label it Highway Review Request Willow Glen, and slide it into the metal bin behind her desk. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural, and it was spreading. 2 days later, the HOA held a special emergency meeting. This time it wasn't in the usual rec center. It was in the back room of the community church. Karen wasn't smiling when I walked in. Her shoulders were tight. Her mouth was flat. She didn't say a word to anyone unless it was procedural. The board had clearly been talking. You could feel it. The kind of low-key tension that comes when secrets start rotting from the inside out. Mark, one of the newer board members, stood and announced that due to recent concerns regarding transparency and homeowner engagement, the board would be implementing new policies. All discretionary spending over $200 would now require full board approval. Community members would receive 7-day written notice before any alteration to shared property. And, most importantly, the board would conduct a vote on whether or not to retain Karen as acting president pending audit results. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen didn't interrupt, but her hand gripped the edge of the folding table so tightly I saw her knuckles go white. The vote was scheduled for the following Friday, 7 days. That's how long I had to make sure every homeowner who had been silenced, ignored, or steamrolled finally had a voice. I printed flyers, walked every block in our development. I didn't knock on doors. I stood back 6 feet, waited for Iker movement, and handed them over with a quiet, "You deserve to know what she's done." I posted the city audit link on the community bulletin board and emailed it anonymously to the neighborhood mailing list. I included scanned copies of her emails, highlighted the line where she called the bench unwanted clutter. Every person who had smiled politely at her HOA holiday parties now saw her real words in black and white. By Thursday, Karen snapped. She went on a neighborhood walk with a clipboard and began warning people that unauthorized distribution of misinformation was a punishable offense under the HOA charter. A father watering his lawn filmed her saying it. That clip made it to a private Facebook group by nightfall. The caption read, "Is she serious right now?" And under that, over 80 comments in 24 hours. Friday came fast. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The meeting was packed. More homeowners than I'd ever seen show up. Standing room only. Karen opened with a long-winded speech about preserving the values of the neighborhood, how emotions had been stirred, and how miscommunication had led to unnecessary tension. She looked directly at me as she said that. I didn't blink. When the vote began, people lined up one by one. Mark called the names. People raised hands, said aye or nay, and stepped back. I thought it might be close. I was wrong. The final count, 61-12. Karen was officially removed from the position of HOA president. Her face didn't change. Not at first. She just sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped working. Then she reached for her purse, stood up, and walked out without a word. No applause, no yelling, just quiet, cleansing, final. The board elected. Mark as interim president and announced the restoration of the memorial bench as their first act. Volunteers would assist me with the reinstall. That night I returned to the park with a small lantern and a new anchor bolt in my hand. The hole was still there, the dirt settled but soft. I lowered the bench frame into place, tightened the bolt, sat down. The cold wood didn't bother me. The silence didn't hurt. I stared up at the stars and whispered something my dad used to say whenever someone underestimated him. I don't raise my voice. I raise results. And now, had I. The bench was back and so was I. But if I thought it ended there, I was wrong. Karen didn't vanish after her presidency was stripped. She just got quieter, sharper. Her influence might have been removed from the board, but her fingerprints were still all over our community. She had built her little empire carefully. Alliances, favors, secrets. And just because the throne was empty didn't mean the poison was gone. I noticed it first in the group emails. Anonymous concerns about trash cans left out too. Long. Notes about unapproved gatherings in driveways. A woman down the street, Maria, got cited for a flower bed that hadn't changed in years. The language in the letters? It was different. No longer signed by Karen, but the tone was familiar. The pettiness, the fake professionalism layered over real venom. I knew then, Karen still had her hands on the steering wheel. She'd simply moved to the shadows, so I dug deeper. It started with old financial records. Karen had held her post for 4 years, plenty of time to shape spending, steer contracts, and create loopholes. I went back through every budget, report I had, each quarterly PDF she'd emailed out as if it were gospel. I made a spreadsheet, itemized line by line, every contractor payment, every landscaping fee, every equipment rental or beautification initiative. And then I started making calls. It was slow work, one company at a time. Some had changed owners, some had no memory. But eventually, I hit one that stuck. A tree service company that billed the HOA over $9,000 in 2 years. The owner remembered Karen, said she was very direct. When I asked what work they did, he paused. We trimmed a few trees, maybe 3 times. Nothing worth that much. I asked if he had copies of the work orders. He said he'd check. 3 days later, he emailed me scanned documents, 2 receipts, one for $400, another for $650. Both signed, both dated. That was less than $100 total. Not $9,000. I printed everything and stared at it for a long time. Where had the rest of that money gone? I didn't want to guess. I wanted proof. That meant one thing. Bank statements. And those weren't public. Not unless you had someone on the inside. I didn't, but I had something close. Mark, the new board president. I invited him for coffee, not formal, just neighborly. We sat on my porch watching squirrels dart through the trees like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. I told him what I found, showed him the spreadsheet, the copies, the gaps. He leaned back and sighed. We always assumed Karen was aggressive. But this is theft. I nodded. And it's buried under 4 years of fake authority. He promised to take it to the board, said he'd request a third-party audit. He kept his word. The board voted 4-1 to authorize a forensic review. Karen, of course, claimed it was a witch hunt. She emailed the entire neighborhood accusing Mark and me of orchestrating a power grab. She called me a grieving man on a vendetta. She said I was obsessed, and in some ways, she was right. But obsession isn't always a flaw. Sometimes, it's what truth needs to breathe. The audit took weeks. During that time, Karen got nastier. She started reporting people for the smallest infractions. Lawn height, mailbox paint, parking too close to curbs. But this time, the board pushed back. No more fines. No more warnings without evidence. She wasn't in charge anymore. And the more she flailed, the more people saw it. The audit results arrived in a sealed envelope. Mark called an emergency board meeting. This time, the room was even fuller than the one where Karen had been voted out. He opened the meeting with a single sentence. We found discrepancies, gasps, murmurs. I stayed silent, let him lead. He read through the findings. Over $21,000 in unaccounted for payments, fake vendor accounts, duplicate invoices, 3 checks written to consulting firms that didn't exist. One of the accounts traced back to a P.O. box, registered under the name of Karen's nephew. She wasn't in the room, but her name was everywhere. Someone asked if she'd be prosecuted. Mark said they'd submitted everything to the city attorney. The HOA was filing charges. That night I walked the block again. Not with flyers, not with outrage, just peace. Quiet conversations, people shaking my hand, nodding. One elderly man placed his palm on my shoulder and said, "Your dad would have been proud." I didn't reply. I just nodded, because in that moment it wasn't about pride. It was about restoration, about finally making something right in a world that so often gets it wrong. A week later, Karen's house went up for sale. No goodbye. No announcement, just a for sale sign stabbed into the grass like a white flag. She left in the middle of the day, a moving truck, 3 boxes, no neighbors waving. I watched from my porch as she pulled out of the cul-de-sac. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat on the bench that was back where it belonged. Strong, steady, quiet. And that's when I realized this was never about revenge. It was about resistance, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout but endures. The kind my father taught me when I was too young to understand what dignity really was. It's in how you build things, how you protect them, and how you never let anyone erase what was built with love. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt calm. No letters taped to doors. No early morning violation emails. No whispers of fear about what Karen would say or do next. Her house sold faster than I expected. The sign came down 3 days after she left. The new owners were a quiet couple with a baby on the way. They asked if anyone knew what the HOA was like, and I just smiled and said, "Much better now." The board stabilized quickly under Mark's leadership. He brought in an outside accountant to help restructure the budget. All homeowners were emailed a transparent report each month. Violations, if any, came with a conversation, not a threat. For a while I thought maybe that was it, that the story was over, that Karen was gone and the system was healing. But then something strange happened. I received a call from the city clerk's office. A woman named Elaine said she had something I might want to see. I drove down the next morning. She met me at the counter with a slim brown file and a guarded look on her face. "You didn't hear this from me," she said. "But someone requested to file a new HOA corporation for a nearby development, one that's not even fully built yet. And guess who signed the paperwork?" I opened the file. There it was, Karen Thompson, same handwriting, same signature. Different name on the HOA, but same methods, templated bylaws, heavy discretionary clauses, and vague budget control rules. "It's not illegal," Elaine said, "but after what you went through, I figured you'd want to know." I thanked her, drove home, sat in my car for 15 minutes. Then I started making calls. The new development, Crestwood Ridge, was just across the main road. Half-built homes, promises of gated tranquility. Karen had already wormed her way in before the asphalt dried. This time I couldn't go through the HOA. There wasn't one yet. Not really. Just a legal framework and a few eager homeowners excited about their new slice of suburbia. So I printed flyers. Again. But this time, I warned. I didn't accuse. I told the truth. What had happened in Willow Glen. I listed facts, cited public audits, shared newspaper links. I spoke carefully, clearly, never bitter, just honest. Some people didn't want to hear it. One woman slammed her door. Another told me Karen had been nothing but kind. But a few listened. A few asked questions. And within a week a small group had formed. Crestwood Voices. They weren't trying to block Karen. They were just trying to be ready. And when she tried to file her first discretionary project budget without a vote, they shut it down. Legally, Professionally, quietly. Karen resigned from the Crestwood HOA within 3 months. Cited hostility. Moved again. This time, out of state. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Because that's not how you beat people like her. You don't chase them. You outlast them. You make the system stronger than their control. And you teach others to spot the cracks before they widen. Back in Willow Glen, I kept to myself. Attended meetings when I could, sat on the back row, said very little. The bench stayed exactly where it was. Neighbors started using it again. Someone even added a small flower bed nearby. A quiet tribute. They didn't ask for permission, and no one gave them grief. One afternoon in early spring, I found a card tucked into the bench's slats. Handwritten, no name. It read, "I never knew your father, but this space feels peaceful. Thank you." I folded it carefully, placed it in my wallet, and never told anyone. Some things don't need to be shared to be sacred. Around that time, the local paper ran a follow-up piece. From HOA tyrant to community rebuild, how one man helped expose a neighborhood power grab. They used a photo of me sitting on the bench. I didn't like it, but I understood why it mattered. It wasn't really about me. It was about the idea that quiet people can do loud things when the time calls for it. The truth doesn't always come with a microphone. Sometimes it comes with documentation, patience, and the unshakable decision not to let grief turn to silence. That summer, we held the first real community event in years. A barbecue, no mandatory cleanup, no fines, for balloons. Just neighbors in lawn chairs, kids running in sprinklers, and music that didn't stop at 9 p.m. I manned the grill with Mark. At one point, a younger guy, new to the neighborhood, asked about the bench. "Looks important," he said. I smiled. "It is." "City put it in?" "No," I said. "Someone else did, and someone else tried to take it away." He looked confused. I didn't explain, because it wasn't about the story anymore. It was about the result, about reclaiming a space and holding it open for peace. That's what people like Karen never understand. They think control is power. But real power, the lasting kind, lives in what you give, not what you take. It lives in the neighbors who show up when no one's watching, in the man who takes notes when everyone else shrugs, in the father who builds a bench for someone who may never sit on it again, and in the son who refuses to let that memory be erased. Quiet justice doesn't come with a bang. It comes with a chair that never moves, again, and a name that no one forgets. I don't know what Karen's doing now. Maybe she started over somewhere new in a neighborhood that hasn't figured her out yet. Maybe she's softened, or maybe she's just learned to hide it better. But I stopped checking. There comes a point when you realize the goal was never to chase someone down. It was to stop letting them live rent-free in your world. And mine? It's finally quiet, peaceful, the way my father would have wanted it. It took time for the anger to settle. Even after the bench was restored, even after she was removed, after the budgets were cleaned and the board got back to sanity, part of me still held on to that tension, like my muscles had been wired to stay ready, just in case. But peace, I've learned, isn't something you find. It's something you build, day by day, action by action. Not always loud, often thankless, but unmistakably strong. I still walk to the park every morning, not out of ritual but out of gratitude. That bench isn't just a tribute to my father anymore. It's a line in the dirt, a declaration that we're allowed to hold space for what matters, even when no one else sees it. Especially then. One morning, I sat down with a thermos of coffee and watched the neighborhood slowly come to life. Sprinklers ticked on. Dogs barked in the distance. A teenager jogged past with earbuds in, nodding as he passed. And then a woman I didn't know, probably knew, approached with her daughter in tow. She looked at the bench, then at me. "Did you build this?" she asked. I nodded. "For someone special?" "Yeah," I said. "My dad." She smiled. "It's beautiful. We come here a lot now." It's the quietest part of the block. Her daughter, maybe 6, skipped over to the edge of the bench and sat down, legs swinging. "It's my favorite bench," she said proudly. I felt something loosen in my chest. The tightness that had lived there for years, gone, replaced, with a kind of stillness that didn't ask for more, just existed. Later that afternoon, I found a folded note tucked beneath the bench. This one wasn't unsigned. It came from Harold, the older gentleman who had stood up for me in the first meeting. It read, "You didn't just restore a bench. You reminded us all that our voices still count. Thank you." I kept that note too. Slipped it into the back of my father's old field journal, the one with grease stains on the corners and a faded army patch on the cover. That night, I lit a candle on the porch. No occasion, no anniversary, just me and a quiet breeze. Sat in the chair he used to sit in, sipping tea instead of his black coffee, thinking about all the little things he taught me that didn't feel important at the time, like how to listen more than speak, how to tighten bolts the right way, how to walk away from a fight unless it's the kind of fight that matters, and how to never, ever let someone take from you what they didn't help build. That's what this whole thing was about. Not just a bench, not just a woman who abused her title, but about knowing when to stand your ground even when it shakes under you. Because grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise, focused, if you let it. And when someone tries to turn that into a weapon against you, the best revenge isn't screaming back. It's showing them that you didn't break, that you rebuilt, better, stronger, and out loud. Karen tried to erase my father's memory, but in the end it was her that got erased. From our minutes, from our systems, from our future. And all because of a simple bench placed by a son for a father who believed in quiet strength. That's what people will remember. Not the fines, not the meetings, not the tension, but the thing that stayed, the thing that mattered, the thing no one could take again. So if you're watching this because you've been silenced, because someone with a clipboard or a badge or a title told you your voice doesn't matter, I want you to remember this. No one can erase you unless you let them. Stand your ground. Tell your story. And never, not for a second, stop believing that quiet people can win loud battles. We just fight differently. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Because stories like this, they don't spread unless you help share them. And if you want more real stories about real people who took their power back, subscribe. Because here, we don't just survive Karen, we end her reign, one truth at a time.